This is NDTV. And you're watching NDTV Prime. In association with Micromax. Nothing like anything.
Welcome to a very special episode of CNB here on the NDTV network. It's an initiative I had promised that we would continue to take up, and it's one that we're not letting go anytime soon. Safer Cars for India is part of a larger road safety initiative that the country needs to take up as well. And luckily, there is some movement. If you remember, a few months ago at the start of the year, in fact, we brought you exclusive access to 5 car crash tests that were conducted by Global NCAP, where you saw popular models being crash tested. At the time, of course, we got lots of reactions from you. There has been a second round of tests, and we're not just going to show you those results today. We're not just going to take you through some of that very startling footage, but we're also going to be discussing this with some special guests and try and understand what India needs, where things need to go. So over the next half hour, all of that is coming your way. CNB viewers will recall the first round of crash tests for Made in India vehicles and the results we shared with you at the start of the year. The Tata Nano, Maruti Suzuki Alto 800, Hyundai i10, Ford Figo and Volkswagen Polo had all failed the tests for various reasons. Chief amongst them was the lack of airbags in the base variants. Then later in the year, we brought you the prep and test of the Maruti Suzuki Swift being crashed. Subsequently, there have been more tests. And today, we have all fresh results once again for you. We're not letting that story go, I can tell you. We believe that India deserves safer cars, and luckily, I am not the only one here. There are other people who agree with me on that. And in fact, I have with me here in our studio the chairman of Global NCAP, Max Mosely. It's good to have you here with us. Alongside him, we also have David Ward, the Secretary General of Global NCAP. Welcome, David. Dr. Rohit Baluja represents IRTE from here in Delhi. And also right next to me here is Thomas Ehrenberg, who heads Volvo's business here in India. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We're also joined by the Secretary, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, Mr. Vijay Chhibber, and also a special guest joining in from Mumbai, the man who heads the automotive and farm equipment sectors for Mahindra and Mahindra, Dr. Pawan Goenka. Many thanks all of you for joining us. We also have a very special studio audience here with us today, and I can tell you that we want to quickly lead off by talking about that second round of tests that I mentioned. Second round of NCAP crash tests for Made in India cars were carried out over the past few months. And one of them is a very popular model, the other a relatively new entrant. The Datsun Go is a new low-cost car that was launched earlier this year. It's the revival of the Datsun brand by Nissan, and the car is made for India and will soon be shipped to South Africa as well from the Renault-Nissan plant in Chennai. Now, you can actually take a look at that car getting crashed. The Go is, of course, not offered with airbags or ABS in any of its variants. It is a cheap entry car. It's designed to address the kind of market that's been dominated by Maruti with the Alto 800 and now, of course, Hyundai with the Eon as well. Let's take a look at the crash test. All right, wasn't obvious enough to you? Well, the car didn't do well naturally. You could see a lot of that. Poor protection for the driver and passenger. Number of fatal injuries sustained, and the body shell also rated as extremely unstable. You can see why, of course, the car then came back with absolutely a 0-star rating. And let's have a quick look at the analysis further from there. What is of course looked at is not just what happens to the car itself, but also its occupants, remember. And in the case of this accident simulated at 64 kilometers per hour, you did have the crash test dummies sustaining extremely fatal injuries as well. And in fact, the driver's side crash test dummy in particular looking extremely difficult there. And you're not surprised then why it comes back with a 0-star rating. Now, let me go ahead and get a quick question into Vijay Chhibber. The government has been talking, Mr. Chhibber, about finally addressing this much required need in the country. What is the government's current position on a sort of a new revised sort of regime for modern vehicle safety?
Well, as you're aware, the Motor Vehicle Act is a fairly old piece of legislation. It was felt that we need to improve upon this legislation quite significantly, and towards that end we have made a draft of a new road transport safety bill. This bill has drawn from various sources in terms of ideas and in terms of what we need to achieve, and it's through a process of consultation that we have developed this draft bill.
Pawan Goenka, let me come across to you next. We have now finally started to see, like I said, a slightly different environment than what there was just a few days ago. You just heard there from Mr. Chhibber as well. Are you encouraged by this?
So let me start off by saying that there is no doubt that the fatalities and road accidents are amongst the worst in India. And there's no doubt, and thanks partly to what you did about 6 months ago, there's a lot more awareness and concern about the road safety and road accidents in India. I also want to add that in order for us to get to where we want to be, it is an interplay between the man and the machine. What we are concerned about is whether the Indian consumer is willing to pay for the technology. And clearly that is driven partly by regulations, as Mr. Chhibber said, and partly by the awareness that the consumers have on what a safer car would do for them. And if you were to look at just dual airbag and ABS, it costs as much as 5% of the total car's bill of material. And therefore, we need to look at how we work with suppliers to reduce the cost of providing safety to the consumer. It's not a technology it's not a technology issue, it's a cost issue. And perhaps the Government of India can also take a look to see whether they can exempt safety features from excise duty or VAT. Which will certainly reduce the cost of these features for consumers by about a third.
What I want to quickly ask you is the point you mentioned about how some of this equipment is a little bit more expensive here to source in India for manufacturers who are actually making cars here as compared to somewhere in the West. Do you think that will change once there is a legislation and economies of scale kick in and everybody does have to start including these features?
I think economy of scale certainly would make a difference. Even today, most of the equipment that goes into an ABS or an airbag is imported, and therefore the costs are high. There is import duty involved, and I'm sure that once the production starts in India, the costs will come down.
And I want to quickly add here that in fact 6 months ago, that's exactly what we threw at the industry, and it was in fact Mahindra who's the only one that's responded with that. So kudos to the Scorpio team. But want to quickly ask you, Mr. Chhibber, we've been hearing about an imminent legislation that's going to revise all these old archaic laws, because very often manufacturers like to say that, hang on, we are meeting all requirements laid down by the government. Now, those requirements, of course, are grossly inadequate. We know this. Tell us a little bit more about the new draft bill.
Road safety is now a part of this act. The earlier act did not focus on road safety. This new legislation has a very specific focus on road safety. We had earlier intended to set up a separate authority to provide an institutional framework for road safety. That has been going on for 4 or 5 years. In fact, a draft legislation had been sent to the last parliament. And now that has been put on hold. There would be no separate need to take a legislation for a road safety authority. It will be part of this proposed bill. In the interim, what is proposed is that through executive order, we will set up the National Road Safety Authority. For that, a draft cabinet note has already been prepared and is presently under circulation.
Pawan, back to you. Whenever there is a legislation change or any kind of new policy, of course, there's always a little bit of a adjustment period, if you will, that industry is allowed so that they can adopt some of these new initiatives. What kind of lead time do you think that the industry will need? That's one. And then what kind of lead time do you think you will need in terms of the vehicle portfolio that you already work with?
See, unfortunately, for safety regulations, the basic structure of the car has to be changed. Unlike emission, where you could only be changing engine or after treatment, or fuel efficiency, which is primarily coming from engine and other friction material. Therefore, in safety, I think to make basic changes will require almost a full product development cycle, which means 3 to 4 years of lead time to completely implement whatever the new regulations are.
All right. Well, that's encouraging enough. Pawan, I know you have to get going, so we thank you for joining us today. It is, of course, great to hear what you had to say about this, and more power to you when it comes to adding those safety features. Thank you again.
Delighted. We'll wait to see what others have to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's always the case, isn't it? Volvo, Thomas, has always used safety as a marketing plank, in fact, in most markets. It's by default seen as the safest car on the road by many as well. That didn't just happen by chance. I mean, this was a conscious decision to always keep that at the front.
Yeah, Volvo was established in 1927, and the two founders of the Volvo car company, they said that cars are driven by people, and so that everything we do in the company is and must remain safety. So we have been talking about safety and awareness of how to make our cars more safe on the roads. We have now a vision that by 2020, which is only about 5 years from now, that if you sit in a Volvo car, we actually promise you and we can guarantee you that you cannot die in a Volvo car. So that is some of the technologies that we're moving forward.
David, very often the argument that's made, and you've heard this the last time you were here as well in India 6 months ago, that it's different for a company like Volvo because you're talking about a premium car buyer in the first place who's willing to shell out a lot more money for many other things, not just these things, and so expect safety to be a part of that package. But Mahindra, for example, has to deal with a mass end of the market, and then there are guys like Nissan and Datsun who have to go even lower. The argument that the consumer doesn't want it, we've tried to refute that because consumer just doesn't know. But what about that whole meeting the price competitiveness that a market like India throws at you?
Well, a very interesting fact is look at the cost of airbags over the last 15 years. They've fallen by 60%. That's the kind of cost reduction that manufacturers who are buying airbags from specialist companies have gained. And as we reach a much more global integrated industry, and if, for example, there was a regulation in India that mandated the main UN frontal impact crash test standard, then every single new car in India would have to have at least a driver's airbag.
And that incentive always works, especially a financial one, we know this. We're going to slip into a short break. Before we do that, though, a very quick look at a statement and a response we do have from Nissan in India, which of course heads the Datsun business. This is, of course, remember, a test that was carried out on the Go with Nissan and Datsun having been informed and invited to the test as well. Now, Global NCAP wrote to Nissan's CEO Carlos Ghosn asking him to withdraw the Go from the Indian market. Nissan now further says Datsun developed the Go with an intention to deliver a package of adapted solutions to local conditions, which aims to decrease the potential risk of accidents, and that automotive regulation standards in India are constantly evolving, and as a global manufacturer, it's keen and ready to play an active role in the continuous improvement of regulation and safety. Welcome back. Now, as I promised, the other car crash test that was carried out. Now, this is a car that many of you will want to know about. In fact, when we did the first round of tests, I can tell you that we heard from so many of you asking for this model. It is a very popular model, sells in huge numbers. The Maruti Suzuki Swift. The car was tested in two variants, both made at the Manesar plant, that's Maruti's plant outside Delhi. One was a car with airbags, that's the standard model for the Latin American market where it's exported from here. And the other one, of course, that's the base model here in India, a car without airbags. Let's take a look at the Indian model. All right, so what are the results here? Let's take a look at the results as well for you. The lack of airbags, of course, instantly means that the car fails the test. But having said that, you still see that there is poor protection for the driver, particularly because of the steering column being right in front. The body shell is still rated as unstable, but as I mentioned, holds its integrity a lot better than what you saw with the previous test. Take a look at what happens there because of a lack of airbags. The color coding on that chart tells you that anything that goes to red is extremely poor, which means fatal injuries. You've got to try and stay as green as you can. The crash test dummy on the passenger side doing a little bit better than the driver. So of course, receiving no stars there. That's the Maruti Suzuki Swift, that's for India. And a very crucial point being made here, and I think that's something that we've been talking about extensively right when this whole thing started. That's the point you want to try and drive home as well, isn't it, Max? That a car like this, throw in airbags and it makes a huge difference straight away.
Well, this is the thing, and that's why it's so important to persuade people to buy the cars with airbags, but even more important that the manufacturer, as Rohit said, should offer it as an option. Because once people know that on the one side the car is really dangerous, but with the airbag it's very safe, relatively speaking, then people will buy it with an airbag. But if they don't know and the airbag's not available, they can't do that.
Give us the flip side of that, David. The car with airbags that was tested for the Latin American market, how did that do?
Well, it scored 3 stars, which is a survivable crash. It's a much better result. And I think there are 2 things here that are really powerful. One, with the airbag, the car would pass the minimum UN regulation. Whereas the Datsun Go, even with an airbag, wouldn't. And that's because the body shell in the Datsun collapses so totally that it's pointless to fit an airbag.
Tell me this, Dr. Baluja, the whole awareness point in India, which has always been lacking. I know institutes like yours have been trying to change that situation. Seeing these kind of images, being flashed on TV screens the last time seemed to get people to notice. So therefore, do you think there is more of this that needs to be done? We need to start seeing this so that people believe that there's a problem?
No, I don't think so. That yes, that the consumer needs that sort of an awareness, which the consumer doesn't have at all. So yes, they need it, but it will not reach down to every consumer. What we need is regulation.
I think Maruti Suzuki has always been conforming to all the regulations which are there in India. All our products meet that. Safety is of paramount importance to Maruti Suzuki. As our endeavor towards that, we are making sure that we are educating our customers and the public at large through IDTRs and Maruti driving schools. So that's something which we definitely do. The second thing which we are doing is making sure that ABS airbag technology is available on various variants of all our products, so that a customer today has a choice to do. And thirdly, we will be working towards making sure that all future regulations which are going to come in, Maruti is going to be able to meet that requirement. And we have set up a state-of-the-art proving ground in Rohtak and also a crash lab. So all development efforts will be there and to make sure that we do a timely development for the Indian customer.
Mr. Chhibber, let me ask you that then. Will India get its own NCAP as well for crash test ratings? And will it sort of cover things like safety equipment as being a part of that? Because as David was just pointing out, just simply adding airbags is not always the answer.
Unfortunately, currently we do not have a crash testing facility within the country. If vehicles have to be checked out, they have to be sent to other geographies where such facilities are there. We hope to have our first crash testing facility ready in the next couple of months. This is going to be based out of Chennai. And it is only once this facility is ready that we would be then mandating the NCAP, India's NCAP, as an essential as an essential ingredient in terms of making sure that the vehicles that are on the road and available to the Indian consumer are meeting the minimum standards.
That is actually very encouraging, because this is a complete shift from what we had been hearing or not hearing from government for quite some time. So do you believe we're finally getting somewhere now? I mean, I remember when we first met, that whole sort of frustration over not being able to get through to the lawmakers seems to be changing.
This seems to be a very big change, absolutely. And of course, I mean, seen from an Indian point of view, you make a car here and the safe version is sent abroad. The version that's on sale here is very dangerous. And I think no government could allow that to continue for very long. So, I mean, very encouraging to see that this change of policy.
If India can regulate to the minimum United Nations standards, it's very important, these are UN, they're not actually European, they're UN standards, and more countries around the world are applying them. And as that happens, we will get the cost benefits. And there is a UN Decade of Action for Road Safety, so it's a good opportunity for India to lead there. That will bring down the cost of these technologies, and then NCAP type work, the sort of things we're doing, will raise awareness. Because I think we're all very impressed and pleased that just since January, and the fantastic work that NDTV has been doing and your car and bike show in highlighting this, we can sense that there's growing awareness.
That's something that hopefully will revolutionize the way things are being done today, and change not just attitudes, but also real things happening on the ground as well. We're completely out of time, gentlemen. All of you, thank you so much for being here, and we'd especially like to thank Global NCAP for bringing this initiative so strongly to India. Thomas, thank you for your time as well, and Dr. Baluja, you've also done a remarkable amount of work there, so thank you for that and for being here today. Mr. Chhibber as well, thank you. We do hope that this draft bill sees the light of day very, very soon, and many thanks also to Pawan Goenka and our studio audience. Please always remember that when it comes to safety, the change has to start with you. It has to start with your attitudes. Insist that your loved ones wear seat belts, wear helmets, don't use their cell phones when they're driving, and that'll probably make a difference, or start to make a difference with just that much in the very first place. Thank you for joining us.